I'm here with Kate. She's my best friend's mother, and she's from Australia, and she's Jewish, and her husband is from Spain, and he's Catholic. And I'm going to interview her about our topic, the topic. So I want to ask you, Kate. So have you guys ever faced any conflict during your marriage with your husband because of your background and his background?
So first, I've got to say, I don't like wearing glasses in an interview, but I do have to put them on because it's very glary. So excuse me for that, Manette. Thank you for interviewing me. So my husband and I met when I was living in Spain, and we were fairly young, I think, in our sort of late 20s. And when we decided to get married, it didn't even occur to me that there may be a conflict, because I loved his country, I loved his culture, and we loved each other. And I think we were very similar in our way of thinking. So differences were not a problem, but it really was more that it made things exciting, you know. So I was brought up in a family in Australia. Firstly, we're not very religious. My husband isn't very religious either. And secondly, I was
Traditional,
brought
maybe not just religion.
tradition, exactly,
Yeah,
because
like raising the kids, maybe like you might want them to raise in your own tradition or one in his own tradition.
well, that's when the differences start,
Yeah.
right? With children. But before children, you know, I was brought up in a family that we were always taught it didn't matter what color, what religion, what race. My father grew up in the United States, and being Jewish, he was in Florida in the 40s and 50s, and it was a very difficult time for minorities. So he taught us very much about it being accepting. My husband's family had no problem with me being a different religion, but they sort of just didn't really understand it because they'd never met anyone. 99.5% of their country is Catholic,
Yeah.
or was in those days. Now there's, you know, a little bit of a change, but they didn't have a problem. They just didn't really understand. They didn't know what it was to have someone from a different religion. So we moved to the US when right before we had kids. So I think the real differences started with children, and that's when for the first time we really had to think about, oh, do we both agree or do we disagree?
Yeah.
So, you know, there were two very clear examples. When our daughter was born, she was born in Spain, and the very first thing they wanted to do was pierce her ears, because culturally that's traditional in Spain, and it's also a very Catholic tradition. In Australia, for my experience, it's not traditional at all. So I had never thought of piercing my daughter's ears when she was a baby. So we talked about it, and Juan Carlos didn't care. So luckily he didn't
So you
care. So
fixed
we
the
didn't do it.
conflict. Yeah, you
There
didn't
was no
accept.
conflict because he didn't care. It wasn't
Yeah.
that important to him. Now, the next, what could have been a conflict, luckily it wasn't, was when our son was born. And in Australia, not just because we're Jewish, but in Australia, just like in the United States, you know, things are changing a little bit, but it was customary that boys were circumcised. All boys are in the Western world. And I think it's changing a bit, but you know, it was very, very normal, whereas in Spain that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And luckily, again, my husband didn't care, and he said, if it's important to you, and if, you know, in Australia they say, you know, the medical field sort of says it's better, then go ahead, no problem.